So I think probably, I see that there are 7 participants so far in the session. Welcome everybody. I don't know if you, uh, sorry, I'm just setting a filter. Yeah, I don't know, I don't know how many people are going to turn up, so I don't know whether or not it's worth it to wait. But this session is going to be about whether or not event tech is evolving. Virtual event tech specifically is evolving in a way that might pit event planners against each other, and to create sort of a competitive arena within the platform itself. And this talk is going to be motivated in large part by research that I did for an article that I wrote on eventmanagerblog.com, where I am the deputy editor currently. And basically the concept is that it seems like virtual event platforms are kind of evolving in a few different directions. And there's kind of a debate about the way that they're using attendee data. And it seems to me that there's a stark distinction between platforms that on the one hand allow event planners to retain total control over the attendee data that they bring onto the platform. The organizers completely own it, they completely control it. Once the event ends, the platform removes and scrubs all the attendee data, and attendees for the purpose of the platform don't exist beyond the event or beyond the event brand's purposes. And then on the other hand, you have these tech platforms that are giving attendees their own accounts on the platform that are completely independent of the events that bring them on once those events happen on the platform. And within that second category, you have yet another kind of distinction where there are platforms like SpotMe and like SwapCard who create this other account for attendees, but they don't retain any of the information for the purpose of their own commercial advantage. It's just a question of making the user experience easier for people who want to sign on because they already have accounts there, and the platform will remember them. And so if they sign up for another event, either with the same brand or another brand on the same platform, they don't have to log in and create all the same information again. But then the second sort of segment of that second category are event marketplaces like Eventbrite and Hopin, where you have an account and you sign up for the platform, and you have a sort of contractual relationship with the platform where they manage your data, and then they can market other competing events to you as a user. And so there's this debate in the industry about what kinds of concerns go along with the different methods of managing user data, and whether or not those operate in some way to the event organizer's disadvantage, either by creating outright competition within the platform, or by essentially leveraging all this work that event organizers put into fostering their audiences to then flesh out their own user bases for whatever their future purposes might be. And there was an event actually that UFI put on recently that sort of dealt with this data debate, in which Tim Groot from Grip was essentially making an argument like, yeah, these platforms might be creating user accounts that seem pretty innocuous now because they're not being, those users are not being marketed to, but it's a slippery slope. Once they have that data, what are they going to do with it, right? So that's kind of the basis for the conversation that I wanted to have today. And so I don't want to spend too much time sort of lecturing on it. I'm happy to answer questions to fill out the context if you need it. But one of the questions I wanted to start off with and kind of get a sense from you guys about is what you think about event marketplaces like Eventbrite and like Hopin, where you bring users onto the platform, and then they have access to other events that they haven't necessarily registered for within the platform itself. How does that make you feel as event professionals? Anybody?
Hi, I'm Zaf. Hi, Leanne. Just wanted to kind of share my own experience. I'm always trying to relate back to the in-person experience, right? Like if I went to a conference center, like in New York, we have the Jacob Javits. For every event, we actually have to buy a ticket for. So I don't think it would be a good practice if, like, for instance, as a user in Hopin, and just register for one event and it's just accessible to every event. I think that should be some form of gateway, plus it's just a lot of, user privacy that's involved there. And it's really important to get that standard set from the get-go, because otherwise platforms can just that's this gray area that event platforms can kind of, easily overtake that culture.
Yeah, I think
This
that's
is
a
my
really
take.
interesting point. The concept of the sort of that you're relinquishing some control over the way your attendees gain access to events in general. Um, does anyone else have any thoughts about the concept of control and how important it is for you to have control over that process, as opposed to just sort of acquiescing to the fact that people are now signing up for platforms and they're getting used to this system? Anyone? Does anyone have any questions about the topic that are not are not related to the question I just asked? No.
I
Okay.
just jumped in, so I'm not sure what you guys are discussing.
Oh. Okay. Well, let me rehash it for the new people. Basically, we're talking about the concept of virtual event platforms evolving in a way that presents competition within the platforms themselves. So, for example, with Hopin, when you have an event and you bring all of your attendees onto Hopin, they all sign up for, to get onto the platform for your event. And then Hopin retains their information, creates accounts for them, and then through a feature that they call Hopin Explore, markets other events to them proactively without them having to have signed up for those events. So in that way, it kind of creates competition within the platform itself that I think is, I don't know, it's sort of become a hot topic for people who are interested in data management and how people use it. What do you guys think about that kind of event marketplace model?
I personally, we had a similar instance, I think, in some of our techsytalk events, and we're having to kind of go back and rewrite and put in our contracts privacy clauses, and that that information is proprietary to us. And I think it's going to keep evolving, and it's just, you have to put it in the contract in the beginning.
Okay.
Because we had a similar thing. We think it occurred last year after techsytalk. So, but yeah, I think it's a huge thing.
Okay, so you think it should be managed more at the contract level than sort of looking fundamentally at how a platform is their business model works. It should be just something that you do on a case-by-case basis on the contract.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, we have, like, just for techsytalk this year, like, we have a lot of different platforms, and it's our way that we showcase, so planners have different events going on, different things might jive with your clients. And so if each person, just because they're registering for our event, I don't think that means, that they're automatically opting into all of our clients' mailing lists. And with GDPR guidelines, it's pretty, set and clear that they'd have to opt in. And they're definitely opting into our event. So I think, I think it just is like this safe area if you put it in a contract, and it's, and, people have to source it that way. Then everybody's kind of on the same page moving forward.
Have you ever encountered any pushback from a platform who says, well, this is how we operate? If you're not okay with people gaining access to their own independent accounts and then being able to log into a platform independently of your event, then we're probably not.
Yeah, actually, we did, and we kind of stood our ground. And in the end, it was kind of funny. They wound up sharing, like, well, we had to ask. So I think,
So at the end of the day, they're not going to alienate any business for the sake of being able to pursue this.
Yeah, I think, like, they figured, oh, no harm, no foul, but they try to actually put it in the contract. And, it's part of, I mean, if everybody gives away their mailing list, what value do you have? And I think, in this virtual environment, that's like your significant value. I mean, if you have a community and your outreach is your community, and people are just using that method, I also think it's a turnoff. Like, it's, you get these random emails after you've signed up for an event, and you're like, wow, okay, like, great. And I think it's kind of negative marketing. So I don't think it's, you know, it's good for either party really to do that. I've never really gotten something out of an email blast that I signed up for something that I was like, oh, wow, that was awesome. I'm so glad that he started marketing me.
Yeah. Yeah, email marketing is a tough sell, I think, in general. What do you think about for smaller events though? Do you think there's some potential for events that have yet to really foster their whole audience to gain some sort of a marketing advantage by choosing a platform that a lot of people are on, that will proactively share similar events with, you know, interested prospective attendees? And anybody can feel free to jump in.
Dylan, I was just gonna to Diana's comment. Maybe this goes to this question too. I think while we've never used an online marketplace per se where we're getting that kind of spam with, they've been very independent. So they've been, you know, it is truly, you know, signing into their own independent where we're not keeping that information. It's just inclusive for that alone. But what I would think, and this would be a massive turnoff too with this type of marketplace, is that I think it's, you know, we're in this process right now of educating clients of how to adopt digital tools in general. And I think this is a big disconnect of how we're trying to proactively get, you know, access to virtual events and you know, really gravitate to adopting them and living in them for a long time. But this is what I would say is resistance, because when we get this type of spam on the other side, and you know, I think it's only going to create further issues down the road. How are we going to, you know, how are we going to create a better buy-in for a client to adopt a tool that, you know, we're going to have this type of adverse effect through, you know, spamming and you know, this type of unsolicitation.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't know that any of the event marketplaces proactively email people. I think it's mostly that when people are on the platforms, they use the platforms as a mechanism for finding other similar events. And I know that for, you know, for really large, you know, like the Informas of the event industry, people who host massive events and already have well-established audiences, the concept of building those audiences for the purpose of handing them over to a platform for its own commercial benefit is sort of it's kind of a you know, one they have to take on the chin if they choose that platform, because I think from their perspective, what, you know, like that audience has value, and those users have value, and those users are already attentive to whatever event they signed up for when they decided to get on the platform. So what's the, you know, it seems like a pure disadvantage for events of a certain scale to think about going onto those platforms where the platform might then proactively show those attendees other competing events, because they're trying to accomplish this kind of like, oh, you were interested in that, you might be interested in this sort of functionality. So I think definitely though, I mean, the question about mailing lists and the question about potentially spamming people is one I hadn't thought of, but I think it's a really interesting sort of nuance to this. What could happen if you allow platforms to collect information question. So I think that's a really, really interesting insight, which did not make it into my article. So maybe there's a room for me to do a follow-up there for sure. How do people feel in general about the prospect of on-demand content as it pertains to, you know, as it pertains to virtual events? Are you guys fairly comfortable leaving the on-demand content that you are generating? I mean, if you are providing the content on demand after, I know that this event is. Are you fairly comfortable leaving that on the platform itself, or would you prefer to have that disseminated on your social media channels? I know that some of these brand talks had been made available on YouTube, for example. How do you feel about that? Anyone? Is anyone using on-demand content? Do they think it's like a future thing that they're even thinking about? How do people feel about on-demand content?
Yeah, I think that it's really valuable from what I see in the Cadence platform and the events that we do, is that not always everyone can attend the sessions, or they want to join multiple sessions at the same time. As well as some people will have conferences that are going on at the same time. So being able to, they might buy a ticket and not attend in person, but or during those days, but then they come back. we do see that oftentimes event organizers leave it up for a certain amount of time and they send out emails letting them know it's closing to really get the extra push to see people come in and view the on-demand content. I think it has a lot of value for sure. I think you capture an audience that you might not get in person or on event days.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I know that that's the sort of concept of value that a lot of the tech platforms who are pushing on-demand content are kind of proponing, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I almost exclusively consume on-demand content. There were two sessions in particular I was really interested in yesterday from this talk. One was Stephen Edelman's, and the other one was about COVID safety and in-person events. And I just wasn't able to attend them in person. I watched them both today. So it's like, there's definitely an argument to be made for providing on-demand content there. But I wonder though how that might impact the question of competition in a scenario where you know that some portion of your attendees, potentially many of your attendees, if the whole virtual audience dwarfing the in-person audience thing is turning out to be true, you know that some portion of them are going to be signing up for events, not actually attending them, and then returning to the platform to see the on-demand content. Do you think that it could present a competitive disadvantage to have people sign into a platform with their own independent account and then see multiple events on-demand content based on what they'd registered for on that platform? Or do you think that there are ways to mitigate that, like forcing people to have a separate login for each event?
Definitely important, I think, to back to what I shared earlier, is to have a separate login for every event. It just makes sense, because when you go to a conference, you're buying ticket, even though you're in one big hotel, you're buying tickets or registrations for different events. And I think it really makes sense to do that. As far as competition, I think it just take the concept of social media where it's out there, right? It's just a matter of everybody has their own individuality. But I agree with Brittany, the way that I just had one virtual networking expo last week on event, and one of the things that we did was basically we've left the expo site open for 3 weeks, and we keep telling people, because I'm a firm believer that somebody's going to have to drop off their kids and missing one of those sessions, right? And then they'll be like, I want to see what the engagement look like, right? And that's why, and we also use, I know for me at least, when I'm a producer of a virtual event, I always encourage engagement post-event, because we don't do a great job of following up, right? So we use that video on demand as a conversation piece, right? Whether it's social media or whether it's email marketing, whatever your choice of, engagement or repurposing content. It's just a matter of, hey, you got to come back if you missed this, take a look, because we have this up till, I don't know, because that's the beauty of virtual event. We have the capability of driving traffic back to whatever site we hosted the event at, and that people have that experience. I still believe right now we're in this educational process where people are still figuring out, many people unfortunately think that, online meeting tools like we're in right now is the standard of delivering a virtual event. That's where I am right now, trying to destock that idea of it is not. There's a lot of other virtual event platforms or event technology that is creating or trying to mimic that in-person experience. But people don't understand when they arrive at the place, they feel like they're at the hotel lobby and they're like, okay, now where do I go, right? So we actually have to use that video on demand content as a way to get people back to the site, to click every space, to go check this out. And that's how we've been using it. We leave it a little bit open, like the space open for a bit longer so people can come back. And we even create post-event competitions or contests and say listen, there's a grand prize that still needs to be won, right? Go to the specific sponsor booth and write down a chat. We want to win at the expo, something like that, right? And we found that people do tend to come back if we do that. So that's how we're leveraging video on demand content.
I think those are some really interesting those are some really interesting tips. Thank you. Yeah, I hope I think there are a lot of interesting takeaways there. I'm curious though, as you're sort of pushing as you're pushing the duration of the event beyond the event, and you're following up with them, and you have these sort of post-event engagement mechanisms to bring people back to consume the content and click on things. Do you think that there's a potential for that to fold out forward into a more year-round engagement cycle where you're trying to maintain the engagement until the next event? Or is it just sort of making sure that they've enjoyed everything that you've offered within the given event?
So for me as a producer, whenever I put together or produce a virtual event for myself or for clients, I always kind of like bank on that strategy of building a community. So whenever we build a community, it's not a one-time only, right? That's conversations. Like if you go to a coffee shop, you want to try to meet again at the coffee shop, or however you want to do it. It's always a lead to a different activity. So that's how we've been doing it. You know, we've used it as an opportunity to not only create awareness, like, hey, this is what we do. That's this technology. That's this opportunity for you to participate. You know, this is how you can do it. The new way of doing things. And we've done it that way. And we've also used it to lead, even teach our speakers and presenters. I'll tell you, some of the speakers and presenters may not be realizing the power of the virtual event technology. We've had to handhold them and do some onboarding and say, listen, these are the tools that you have. Our job is to tell you what's available. Now you're going to take this and run, because now you're going to build your own community, right? And we want to make sure that, you know, we all support one another, and we're very pro building community. So that's how we kind of see the engagement per event, not only one time, but ideally to create a collaborative effort. How can I then, you know, through my event, send some people to your event and to more other events? So we kind of built community in that sense, long term, not just today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Does anyone else have any thoughts about how community factors into the equation when it comes to choosing a platform and, you know, and their strategy for virtual events?
I completely agree with everything that Sept has said. We use the same approach. So we don't look at a platform and would never recommend to get into this whole existence of working and producing a digital event with technology for a one and done only. So the idea is to always extend the use of it, and that's always through engagement. So to all the points that Sept had mentioned, everything. So whatever we can create to extend that lifeline, you know, pre and post. I mean, part of it, a large part of it is onboarding, right? We all struggle with onboarding and how to, you know, the help desk, the tech issues related with people getting you into your platform. So that's part of it, but part of it is extending the lifeline of the event cycle length, all that stuff. So yes, so community is a big word.
Yeah, of course.
And I think the other thing, sorry, one more thing that I want to add to that, what Nico, and I think Nico will probably agree too, is this, right? At the end of the day, the technology is going to come and go, right? It's just like changing your underwear, I tell people, because we live in a so high-tech driven kind of world, right? Just like your phones, in 3 months, 6 months, it's obsolete. So as we can see in the past 18 months, this virtual events platform, the event tech, oh my God, they're all like mushrooms. In the past 60 days, I probably sat through 14 VE platform demos. I can tell you which platform basically has the best pricing, features, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's not about the platform. It's about how we strategize and help our clients get that community, meet their goals. At the end of the day, yes, we may have technology or a few event tech, but you know, it's going to come and go. But the base, which is consistent, which is the strategy, the community, and that's what's driving, you know, the event. So that's my take on it.
Well, Zeph, you mentioned that within your community strategy, especially as you're developing a community and you're recognizing other events are happening, you mentioned something about cross-promoting events potentially. So if that's something that event planners are comfortable with, would you say that it's a legitimate concern that event platforms would kind of take it upon themselves to identify people who have a certain interest, who might belong to that community, and then promote events that they would be interested in based on their level of interest in that topic? Because it kind of sounds like the platform is just taking over that function. Is it important that you have control over it?
And this is where I think in one of the roundtables yesterday I mentioned, and I think it'll come down to this, and I probably feel like many people will agree. At the end of the day, there's a human component of this virtual thing, right? This how can we congregate and gather and gaggle whatever people together at the end of the day, virtual event developers, virtual event platform developers, the event technology side, they're always going to just think about their product, their technology, when event producers are pretty much thinking about the community, like how we bring people together. We're creating the memorable experiences, where else, the event tech is just delivering that, right? So I always I always joke about this, but I think that's truth in it. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks about it. I was that sometimes event platforms, virtual event platforms, need to have people in their team who understands the human connection, because that's very important, right? Because the technology comes and go, because today that's 5, next week is going to be 50, and they're going to always compete. But the one that concentrates on engagement, on the humanization, that experience, how do we make our attendees or participants become memorable? That's the kind of platform that will actually have a lot of wins.
That's an interesting perspective, and
Can I make a comment on that?
Definitely.
Because I want to be careful. I mean, I came from the live meeting industry, and then I just finished working with a virtual event platform. We have to be really careful, because the one mistake I think a lot of meeting planners are making is the virtual meeting is never going to have the same experience that the live meeting will have. And I'll use an example here. If I take you on a virtual tour of Rome, and then a week later, I take you to Rome, are the experiences going to be different? And what I think what we need to do is we need to use the virtual aspect to help people primarily get content. Yeah, there can be some engagement and some connecting, but I don't think that the two worlds are totally different.
They should be different,
really,
right?
Really, they should be. And I mean,
virtual offers a lot of different advantages.
One of the things that really stressed planners out was the hybrid component of, okay, when I did strictly virtual, I didn't have to pay meeting room rental and food and beverage. So that was gone. So I could take that money and apply it towards the platform. But when we went to hybrid, it was like, hey, this is going to be, now I've got both expenses. And I think people who do virtual, they're primarily interested in the content. The people who are live, no offense, but if I'm live, I ain't talking to you. I can talk to you next week. I want to be with that person face to face. So I would caution, I think that there are certain, like the scientific area, that's probably an area where you do need that engagement. That's very important. But if you're like in a sales industry, that's got to be face to face. Otherwise, they're just going to use the virtual to consume content. I don't know if anybody agrees with me or not.
I do want to mention that the time is running low a little bit. I don't see Brittany on the I don't see Brittany in the roster anymore, but I was going to give her the last word because I think Zeph, your point about platforms prioritizing the user experience and those being the ones that have a leg up are going to have an advantage, and that's very much what the people that I interviewed in the article that I wrote about this were saying. Their argument, though, was that by giving users independent accounts, it was in the interest of improving their user experience, because it makes logging into platforms easier if they've already done it before. They don't have to go through the same registration steps. They can access all kinds of content within one single space that they're interested in. They don't have to dig through their emails to find the login information for one specific event that they registered for 3 weeks ago, that kind of thing. So I think there is definitely an interesting balance that tech platforms are trying to, at least from their perspective and the rhetoric that you hear from them, there's a balance that they're trying to reach when it comes to making sure that they're looking after the user experience and and observing the planner's imperatives and priorities. Because in some ways, I think as Ken, you were saying, there's kind of a discrepancy there when it comes to platforms trying to drive virtual specific experiences, a lot of planners being sort of resistant and wanting them to mimic in-person experiences. We have this whole 3D platform, plethora of 3D platforms out there now that are trying to create the experience of walking through a trade show within a virtual space with like graphics from a 1990 video game. There's definitely a lot of sort of teasing out that I think still needs to happen, but I think we're out of time. So
Dylan, I was just going to mention that in my experience with a insane amount of using of platforms and working on many different, all sorts of events and all sorts of different platforms, the most successful ones are the ones that are single sign-on. We don't have to create user accounts for. So at the end of the day, if technology can wrap their head around just making it simple and easy and not retaining information and capturing that information for their purposes, potentially, I think we'd have 100% more success in having this adoption and onboard and not having to get in this like vicious cycle of, you know, accounts, user accounts and whatnot.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we've had an interesting discussion. I've definitely learned a lot myself. Hopefully you have as well. But I think we're out of time, right? If I'm not mistaken, this was supposed to end 2 minutes ago. So out of respect for the event and keeping things on track, thank you very much for showing up and for contributing.
Thanks, Dylan.
Bye for now.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you at the next session.